Welcome to Little City, Big Voices, a podcast where we share the real stories of those who love, empower, and champion children and adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities and mental health challenges. These are the voices of a community united by compassion, driven by purpose, and deeply committed to creating a world where everyone belongs. I'm your host, Rich Bobby, CEO of Little City. Little City's vision is to provide a place where everyone can feel included in their community, have someone they can call a friend, and continuously learn and build new skills. And I'm incredibly excited for episode 2 here at Little City Big Voices to have our second guest. It is truly a pleasure to introduce someone that I find extremely inspiring, that I've known for over the past decade, and that is Amy Board, Little City's Director of Community-Based Clinical Services.
Thanks, Rich. I'm very excited to be here.
So just share a little bit about Amy before we dive into some questions here. So Amy, you've been with us at Little City for almost 12 years. You've dedicated your whole career serving individuals impacted by mental health, the youth in the community, and now you lead Little City's new behavioral health clinic in Chicago. So it's just really a pleasure to have you on this podcast because a couple reasons. One, seeing you grow professionally and seeing the impact that you've made over the course of years at Little City on so many children and families that you help support, from the early days of serving as a therapist on the front line to providing that direct support to then growing and expanding a team that is just doing incredible work for so many people. So welcome, Amy. We'll start with, tell us your story. What led you to Little City?
Well, thank you. As I said, I'm very excited to be here today, and Little City is a really special place for me. As you mentioned, I've been here for just shy of 12 years now, and it's been my only home that I've worked at in the state of Illinois. So to give a little background, I originally started out as a social work major and got my graduate degree in social work and thought I wanted to work in schools. I did an internship there and it felt like it just wasn't really for me. I felt it was really limiting the impact that I could have on kids and families working within the kind of constraints of the school system. So I decided to kind of venture out of that into direct service and working directly with kids in clinical work. And I was living in Minnesota at the time. So I got a job at the Fraser Autism Center, which is in Minneapolis, and it services kids, adults, teens with autism, and very similar to Little City in a lot of its mission and a lot of its values. And I worked as a clinician with children, teenagers, families, and I also worked in their day treatment program with preschool age kids. So toddlers that were 2 to 6 that had just gotten diagnosed with autism. And that was a really impactful experience for me working within that community. It just became a passion of mine to service the autistic community and work with these kids that were so interesting and fun to be around. So when I moved to Chicago, I really wanted to continue in that same track. And Little City was one of the first places that I found and I interviewed with and got a job as a therapist in the foster care program. And it was a little bit different than what I'd been doing because it wasn't just kids with autism, but a kind of a wide variety with that special emphasis on kids with autism. I've been here ever since.
So to backtrack a little bit, so you've had such a vast array of experiences. I can't imagine what it was like working with those little ones.
Yes.
You said, was it age 2 to
ages 2 to
5?
6. 2 to 6.
And what was it like working with families who, in some cases, just found out their child was diagnosed with autism? What was that experience like for you?
It was very interesting and informative in terms of learning how that diagnosis can impact families differently, in terms of some of the families that were, really grieving, not having the child that they thought they were going to have, and other families that kind of right from the get-go were embracing this and were doing kind of all that they could to get their child as many kind of experiences and supports as they needed, and seeing the differences in how kids developed from that initial diagnosis. Some of the kids that were in the program I saw for 3 years. That was how long I worked there, was 3 years. And some of them started out, at 2 and were 5, 6 years old when I left, and seeing that growth was really fascinating as well. And seeing what they were capable of. They'd come in and some of these kiddos didn't have any verbal communication skills, and seeing that develop in that time period was really gratifying and exciting.
Well, I know you know this, Amy, is a licensed clinical social worker, is that earlier interventions for children who have autism, the research is just so profound that the positive impact that they have for a lifetime improves significantly simply by intervening before the age of 5.
Yes,
Has
absolutely.
that been your experience? And sounds like you witnessed it directly.
Absolutely. Yeah, I definitely witnessed that directly and seen how much change could happen with that early intervention and with the consistency and frequency of services. The kids in our program, some were coming 5 days a week, some were 2 or 3 days. The majority were most of the days, though, and it was 3 hours every day. And it was a mix of kind of individual work and group work. We used some principles of behavior analysis as well as principles of the Early Start Denver model and floor time. And so it was kind of a cool hybrid of different approaches that was heavily focused on joining the kids in their world, finding their interests, and then helping expand upon that to develop more practical skills. So that frequency of them coming so often and engaging in these different types of activities that we would oftentimes do the same thing every day for 5 days of the week, they were really able to make tremendous growth with that frequency and consistency. That's one thing that I learned moving here and working within the foster care system and primarily the Medicaid eligible population was how much of a scarcity of resources and services are available, and that importance of getting the early interventions is oftentimes not available to those children because there are such long wait lists, sometimes 2-3 years just for basic services. And then if you're looking at more intensive services, they can be decades long wait lists for home and community-based waivers and things such as that. So part of the inspiration for me, and I know we'll talk more about the behavioral health clinic, was being able to expand the availability of those services to families so that they can get them as early as possible.
Yeah, no, Amy, I absolutely want to talk about the behavioral health clinic. Before we dive into there, I want to go back to your journey with us, because it certainly plays a role into why we even have a behavioral health clinic in the first place. As you started out with us, as you shared as a frontline therapist working with kids that were supported in our foster care and adoption program, and you are leading a team of how many clinicians, would you say?
We are currently, including myself, 20.
So tell us about that journey of here you are, therapist, now you're leading a team of 20. What's that been like for you?
It's been really wild, to put it lightly, thinking about that evolution from starting as a therapist. And at that time, we were 1 supervisor and there were 3 of us, so a total of team of 4. At that time, we were servicing just our foster care program, which was about 40 kids, give or take. So those in clinical services, maybe half of that. And it was a slow evolution. So you don't always notice it, as it's happening. But now looking back on it, I think, wow, that's such a change that we've gone through. As I said, though, it was slow. We had growth over time of expanding our foster care program. And so at that point, we kind of doubled our clinical program to accommodate the expansion of the foster care program. Probably around 2020, 2021 was when we contracted with the different Medicaid managed care organizations so that we could offer services to youth outside of our foster care program. And oftentimes this was actually children and teens that were in the foster care program but had exited due to adoption, guardianship, returning home to their natural family. Prior to our contracting with Medicaid, we weren't able to continue servicing those kids. because our funding stream came from DCFS, from the Department of Children and Family Services. So once they exited the program, we didn't have any funding to support them. Contracting with Medicaid, we were able to bill directly to their insurance so that we could continue that service. So that helped us to grow a little bit more as well. And then our foster care program grew some more as well, took on a number of new cases and a whole new office. So that expanded us. About a year ago, we absorbed our behavior team as well. So that consisted at the time of one board-certified behavior analyst and her small but mighty team of one other BCBA, which we've been working on growing that as well. Looking back on it, it's really tremendous what we've been able to accomplish in such a relatively short period of time.
That's certainly a tribute to your leadership, Amy, of you growing a team from the ground up, essentially, as you shared, a team of 3 to 4 to now a team of 20. Yeah. That's making even more of a positive impact on so many children and families' lives. Getting a little over a year ago, came through the stage where we had this opportunity to do something different and to take our services to the next step. To be able to expand our services to serve more kids who have autism, intellectual disabilities, mental health challenges, and help support them and their families. And that was a grant that we received through the Illinois Healthcare and Family Services. You really led that charge. You were the one that said, hey, we should do this. And you did it in less than a year. So, what happened? How did that happen, Amy?
Oh, goodness. Well, it was about a year ago, as you said, I think February of 2024, that this notice came through the state that they were offering this notice of funding opportunity. And it was a very tight turnaround. I think they sent the notice out in February and the grant application was due the end of March. So this is not a very long period of time to pull together this opportunity. The spending timeline would be short as well. It was a grant for just under a year. So if you were awarded it, you would learn in May, and then you'd have to have the funds spent by the following March. So my supervisor, who's our senior VP of Family and Community Services, she presented this to me as, is this something we want to explore? And at first I said, nope, this sounds like a lot of work and I'm not sure that we're going to be able to do it because there was a lot of other things going on at the time. We were already in the midst of growing our program. I thought, I don't know about this. Thanks to her, she really talked me through it. I know I talked with you a little bit, Rich, as well, and thought about, well, what's the harm in giving this a shot? It was something I had always really dreamed of, was being able to have our own dedicated clinic space, because prior to recently, our services have been almost exclusively in home and community. And that is wonderful in many ways. There's many benefits to that, of clinicians being able to meet kids in their natural environments, being able to generalize skills to their natural environments. And from a financial sustainability standpoint, it is difficult for our program to expand in that way, because when clinicians are traveling so much around Chicago, I think about half of our families live more than 20 to 30 miles from our office in Chicago. So that's a significant distance our clinicians are doing. You're limited by how many clients you can serve when clinicians are traveling between, the after school hours. The other thing about serving kids is they're not available all day. They're at school most of the day. You have between the hours of maybe 3 and 7 p.m. and you're traveling, it really limits how many children and families we're able to reach and impact. So I always wanted to have this clinic space, and this grant was something that would potentially allow us to do that, to essentially have a startup capital of being able to establish an office, open it, furnish it, get all of the program supplies that we would need, and also be able to hire additional staff to be able to work within that space as well. I decided to go ahead and go for it, and our grants manager was brand new to Little City at the time. That, I think, in a way was good, because he was excited to jump into something with us, and he was fantastic in helping us get everything organized and put the proposal together. And we asked for a lot from the state, and they surprised us in July of last year, giving us almost everything we asked for, which was really incredible and allowed us to get the ball rolling and starting that clinic that I'd always dreamed of.
That's incredible, Amy. And obviously thank you to the state for this, one-time startup grant that made this possible. At the same time, my humble opinion, it was really made possible because of your leadership. And of course, Emily, your boss as well. To get something and operationalize it in such a short notice, like that's typically unheard of. Normally something like this takes many years or, several setbacks and things of that nature. But you and the team pulled it off. Now it's open. Where is it located?
It is located in the Humboldt Park neighborhood of Chicago, which is on the west side. It is in the same building as our foster care program, just right upstairs, and it's a beautiful space.
It sure is. I've had the opportunity to be there for the ribbon cutting, and it is really an amazing space. Can you just walk through what's in this clinic that's unique? Because, most people think of clinic, okay, it's an office. You sit in a chair, your standard therapies, might have a couple toys for kids, but that's not what this space is.
Yes. So to kind of set the stage, as we've already discussed, many of the youth that we serve have intellectual and developmental disabilities. On top of that, many of our clients also have experienced some level of trauma. We're serving a number of our youth that are in our foster care program. By virtue of being in foster care, they've experienced trauma. And so the standard therapy that you think of sitting in an office at a table talking is not the approach that's going to work for the kids that we're serving. Their needs are much more diverse than that. We really wanted a space where we could use play and support sensory regulation needs of our kids. And so the two main things that I wanted and I knew I needed to have in this space were a play therapy room and a sensory room. A play therapy room that would be filled with all different types of expressive, imaginative supplies and play tools for kids to be able to express themselves and work through play, whatever experiences they were having. We know that for children, play is really their language. It's how they communicate. So treating trauma and treating any type of mental health challenge through play is really effective. So having that play therapy space was really important to us. And the sensory room was also very important because regulation is such a vital aspect to treating trauma and to treating any type of mental health challenge. Our theory within our program is that we take a neurosequential approach to treating trauma and treating children's mental health challenges, which means that
what does that mean, Amy?
Yeah.
It's a neurosequential,
it's a big word.
Approach.
Yeah. So what it looks at, and it comes from Dr. Bruce Perry, who's a renowned child psychiatrist and expert in treating trauma. Really incredible man.
I've had the opportunity to meet him, by the way.
Oh, really?
Yeah. He's as smart as you'd think.
He's amazing. I've heard him speak a couple of times. Very good authority on all of this, all things trauma related. So his theory, which is really supported by research, is that the brain, the way that we need to approach treating trauma is from kind of a bottoms up approach. So the way that the brain is structured is at the bottom of our brains. And this is, of course, going to be a very general overview of how the brain works. But the bottom parts of our brain are more related to motor functions and the basic things that we need to be able to live and survive, like breathing and things like that, our heart rates and all of that. So that's the bottom part of the brain. And then as we kind of go up towards the prefrontal cortex, which is the very top of the brain, that's where we have more of our executive functioning and our ability to plan and to reflect on our past experiences and how they influence our current and future actions and all of that. And then in the middle, we've got kind of emotions and all of that stuff. So if the bottom lower parts of the brain, what another authority on child psychology, Dr. Dan Siegel, he talks about it as the upstairs brain, downstairs brain. So the downstairs brain isn't really working well and isn't calm and isn't able to function, then that upstairs part of the brain isn't going to be able to function either. So if we go into working with a child and we immediately start trying to reflect on their experiences and try to work on their impulse control and all of these things, and their emotions and their bodies are not regulated and are not calm and aren't feeling safe, then we're not going to be making any kind of progress at all whatsoever. Our focus really, first and foremost, needs to be on building felt safety and on being able to have our kids feel calm and regulated. So that sensory room, it serves a big purpose of being able to provide that space for kids, whether it's taking a break in the middle of their therapy session, or whether it's first coming in and swinging for a while, or playing some instruments, or just grabbing a fidget that they can use during their therapy session. It's really towards that purpose of helping kids feel regulated. So the play therapy room, the sensory room, those are our two big special spaces in the new clinic. And then we have a couple of individual therapy meeting rooms for therapists and clients to meet. And other parts are similar to any kind of standard office in terms of meeting rooms and waiting areas and things like that. But the special spaces are really that sensory and play therapy room.
Well, Amy, that I'm gathering from what you just described is we have the sensory room, this play therapy room, and this is backed on science. Mm-hmm. This is backed on decades of research on brain and how the brain develops. And so one can say like, oh, great, can you just have a playground? What's so special about this play area or sensory room? But what you just described really is there's a methodology to the services that your team provides. Yeah. It's not just simply, play with kids.
Right. As you said, there's been a lot of research in that, and a lot of people who are more of authorities than I am on these things that have looked at what specifically type of play materials, what types of toys, what types of things are really effective for kids. And we have really made sure to stock our room with those things that are going to allow for expression, especially. We have a lot of dolls and of all different, kinds of colors and appearances. We have dress-up toys and a lot of imaginative play, puppets and things like that, where kids can be creative in terms of exploring their emotions and being able to act out different experiences and things such as that.
One thing that you had mentioned as relates to how the brain develops is I think the important takeaway is kids who are struggling with some behavioral challenges, kids who maybe have experienced trauma, whether it be to no fault of anyone's, even if it's just the trauma of having a disability because of having to navigate things in a world that's not designed for your life in some regard. That said, you and your team are not working with kids who are bad kids.
No, absolutely not. As you said, a lot of our kids have been through some really challenging experiences, even if it's just the fact of being different than the norm and not being neurotypical, not fitting into whatever, we consider to be the typical mold. I think one phrase that has really stuck with me when I first started working is that kids do well if they can. I'm sure you're familiar with that particular phrase. I think that when you have kids that have these gaps in their developmental experiences, when they have so much stress and worry that they have to deal with on a daily basis because they don't know where they're going to live, or they don't know, if they're going to be bullied when they go to school, or they don't know, for our LGBTQ kids, whether people are going to accept them. It's really hard to do well when you have all of those things stacked against you. Absolutely, our kids are not bad kids by any means. They're all doing the best that they can within their circumstances.
But that phrase, kids do well if they can, is so powerful. And did a good job explaining the rationale, what that means. If I heard you, it's not that kids are choosing to not be well. If they actually could be well, they'd prefer to be well. They don't want to be unsuccessful. It's not that they don't know how to navigate their surroundings, and they could benefit from the skills to help curb that. Even someone who maybe experienced or has a great deal of knowledge on parenting skills, that the skills that are often required or needed rather for them to be successful takes extensive therapies, and that's the purpose, right? That's the why Children's Behavioral Health Clinic exists.
Yeah.
Is that? Would you agree with that, Amy?
Yeah, absolutely. That is a huge part of why we exist, is that support is so needed. A lot of times it is, as you said, something that has to be provided long term, which doesn't really help with our backlog of kids that are in need of services. I think that it contributes to some of our long waiting lists, is that once families are able to get into services, they stay for a long time, because some of these challenges that we're dealing with are ones that require long-term interventions. When we talk about kids' behaviors being something that's kind of developed over time, a lot of times we see kids have developed some of these challenging behaviors as a result of those early experiences that are specifically in order for them to survive and to maintain those parent-child relationships, in order to maintain attachments with their caregivers. And because those have developed over a long period of time, to learn new pathways and to learn a kind of new language, because they've learned the language of trauma, and we want them to learn the language of safety. So that takes a long time. And that means that kids stay with us for a long time, too. We have kids that started with us. They're now adults, but they started with us as kids, and they're now 18, 19, 20 years old.
You want to share one of those stories?
I can share one that comes to mind right away. Is a girl, now she's a young woman. She started with us in our foster care program at the age of 10, and at that time was brand new to foster care, had a diagnosis of autism, had selective mutism as well, which means that she didn't speak in specific settings. So in school, in the community, she was completely nonverbal. We started working with her in our therapy program at that time at age 10, and she stayed in our foster care program until she aged out at 21. She's now in an adult group home, and she's continuing to receive our services and has made tremendous progress. However, these are lifelong challenges that she has, and she's going to need support probably for her entire life. She could potentially continue with us for a long time.
I know there's countless stories that you and your team have witnessed day in and day out. We could spend probably hours talking about. What would you see, Amy, as the vision for this program? Like, if we were to look, years into the future here, what do you foresee it accomplishing?
My vision for our program is to, number one, be able to fill the gaps in Medicaid accessible mental health care for kids, whether it's kids that have experienced trauma, kids with intellectual and developmental disabilities, or, a combination of both. I think is one of the big visions, is that we can have a world, and I know our clinic alone is not going to solve this problem, but contribute to the solution of having a world where any kid that needs mental health care will be able to access it and doesn't have to wait a long time to receive it. And then the other goal would be to be able to maintain a trauma-informed and a neurodiversity affirming space that our families and kids feel welcome in and feel safe and feel like it's a place that they can feel understood and feel hope, that they can feel understood and feel hope.
If somebody does not have the financial means to have private insurance because they might be struggling, trying to make ends meet, you might be working 2 jobs in some cases, and if you have private insurance, sometimes you can access these services rather quickly, maybe even within a month if you're really lucky. For some of these services and trying to find a provider that accepts Medicaid, I've heard maybe it's even longer than this, can be up to 8 months.
Yeah, I mean, it can be absolutely more than that, depending on kind of how specialized the service is that we're looking at. And, I've done research on this just for my own interest and curiosity, and also to kind of affirm that there is this need that we're trying to fill, especially if we're talking about kids that have intellectual developmental disabilities. And if we're looking at mental health, in addition to waitlist, there's already a barrier there because there's so few providers that feel competent and comfortable in providing those services to kids that have intellectual and developmental disabilities. One statistic that I found that was kind of staggering to me was that kids with IDD, that up to 90% of psychiatric providers felt that they had limited training in the diagnosis and treatment of those kids. That is a staggering number. We find kids that are turned away from services based on their communication abilities, based on what their full scale IQ might be. So they're already drawing from a much smaller pool of available providers. And then on top of that, you have wait lists that for those specialized services can be up to 2 years that families are waiting.
If I'm a parent or a family member who has a child who has mental health challenges, who may have autism, may have an intellectual disability, how do I find your clinic?
You can go to our website, littlecity.org. But to start in terms of finding services, it's a challenge because you really have to be savvy in terms of being able to do your research and find these resources. I will say that Rush University Hospital System has an incredible resource, which is a autism resource directory where they list different providers and based on provider type. So if you need a respite provider, if you need a speech therapist or a nutritionist or daycare, you can go and find providers that specialize or service the autistic community. And it will say also what kind of insurance is accepted. If you go in there and look, you'll find very few that accept Medicaid. So that, can be a resource, but still it doesn't provide everything that might be needed. Outside of that, I find families have to spend a long time working with their insurance and trying to call providers and asking if they will service their kids and getting a lot of no's and having to just keep looking until they find somebody like us. So we're trying to do our best at getting our name out there and advertising that we provide this service and that we are comfortable, not just comfortable, but feel excited to work with the IDD population. Right now, that's really kind of what we're doing, is trying to get our name out there and let people know that we exist, whether that's through our social media of Little City, through reaching out to different community agencies and providers, school systems, anybody that comes in contact with kids and families that can let them know about us.
So what advice, Amy, would you have for a family member who has a loved one who has autism and intellectual disability? If you were in an elevator and you ran into someone who has a loved one, maybe their child's with them and is just looking for help and guidance, knowing that you can only talk with them for such a short period of time, what advice would you give them?
I would say to them first, I think reassurance, more than advice, that help does exist and they don't have to figure things out alone. I would refer them to our services in our clinic and let them know that we can help them figure it out. That the most important thing, I think, is to build a community of support, which can be so hard to do. But if you stay persistent and really look, you can, over time, hopefully find people and professionals that can be advocates and that can be a community, because it's something that's just so hard and really impossible almost to do alone. You really need a community of support.
Well, Amy, this conversation has been so informative, and it's certainly been a pleasure having you as a guest. And I think when most think of Little City, it seems to be, it could be wrong, they think of folks that might be going to our adult day services. They might think of some of the folks that we support for employment or that live with our community integrated living arrangements, or maybe the kids that might be living in our residential program. We don't often talk a lot about our services that we're providing out of our Chicago location when it comes down to like behavioral health services that you're describing. I think this is a good opportunity to share that Little City is a very vast organization that provides numerous services in addition to the services I just listed. So I have to say that I'm proud to be a part of your journey and seeing you create a clinic like we have today. It's only been a couple months that this clinic has been open. So this is a brand new initiative and a very exciting initiative, not really for Little City, but for families and for families who have children who have autism and intellectual disabilities, especially those who live in the city, with this being in the city of Chicago. Do you have any final words you'd want to share here, Amy?
Yeah, well, I will just give a little pitch for our services and let everybody know some of what we do provide, because I've given a lot of kind of high level stuff around our philosophy and our treatment interventions, but we do provide individual, family, group therapy and counseling. We do social skills groups. We do provide applied behavior analysis through a trauma-informed lens. We provide parent coaching and support, and starting in August, we'll be doing monthly community professional trainings that are free, starting them out virtual. We might at some point do some in-person ones, but as of now, they will be via Zoom. So our first one will be August 19th. They'll be the third Tuesdays of every month from 5 to 7 p.m. And our topic for our first one is what's really going on, understanding trauma and behavior in kids. You can go on Eventbrite, or I think we're going to be sharing the links to these trainings on our webpage as well. You can register for our free trainings. Registration's open 45 days prior to the training. So I would say come and visit us online and see what we have to offer. And, our goal is not just to provide these services, but also to kind of embed ourselves in the community and be a resource for different families and for our community members.
Excellent. Amy, it's been truly a pleasure having you,
Thank you.
Join me on this podcast. Your knowledge and skills and expertise, I could sit here for hours talking with you further. I hope that our listeners, at least even if they're not looking for services, learn something new as it relates to kids who have autism and intellectual disabilities and kids who've experienced trauma. Stay tuned for more voices, more stories, and more meaning. Visit us on our website at littlecity.org. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. We're always looking for others to join our mission and share their time, talent, and treasure. Thank you for joining Little City Big Voices.
Little City is a nonprofit, for-purpose organization operating for more than 65 years, serving children and adults with autism, intellectual and developmental disabilities, and those experiencing mental health challenges. We offer services in Chicago and the surrounding suburbs, with our main service area located in Palatine, Illinois. We provide residential living arrangement services for children and adults, a therapeutic day school, adult community enrichment and day services, recreational services including amazing arts, horticulture, and special recreation services, employment services, foster care and adoption, and community mental health services. Visit littlecity.org for more information.